Good morning, everybody, or good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to Ftd-Pc Fs number 8 briefing. Okay, we're going to look at the lesson overview. It's going to be a flight from Boeing Field to Spokane. As we taxi out, we'll get a amended clearance and amended runway change. And that will involve setting up the FMC for the amendment. So it will not only be a runway change, but a routing change, and also that affects our performance, so it would be a performance change as well. It not only involves our FMC, but it involves our mode control panel as well, because we have to re-reference the runway heading. Some airlines have a checklist for that if there is a change like that, they can go through a checklist, but many do not. So you just have to make sure you get everything and not forget anything if you have a reroute like that while you're taxiing out. As we get airborne, we'll have some navigation changes once we're airborne. We'll have an engine non-normal procedure. We'll check the VNAV engine out page for that procedure. And whatever causes the engine to shut down, our company will advise us that they want us to try a relight on it. So we'll try a relight, and we will get the engine back. And then on our way into Spokane, we'll have a hydraulic non-normal procedure. And that will lead to a radar vectors for a non-precision approach into Spokane. And that will lead to a missed approach. The missed approach will be modified a little bit because we'll have a hydraulic problem. And then on the missed approach, we'll go hold and get vectors back for the ILS. We'll restore the hydraulic system once we do that, because you do need all 4 hydraulic systems to do an auto land. And since we're doing procedures trainer, there is no visual, so there is no manual landing. They're all auto lands. Let's take a look at the lesson objectives. Flight from Boeing Field to Spokane. Again, there will be a runway change, an amended routing, and a performance change. We'll do a cruise climb during the departure, which we've done several times. We'll have an engine oil temperature problem that'll lead to an engine shutdown. We'll go to the engine out VNAV page to assess what our maximum cruise altitude would be for an engine out. We'll have a direct to waypoint modification. We'll do an engine in-flight start. We'll get the engine back. And then we'll have a hydraulic pressure problem that we'll go through. And that will lead us into the Spokane area where we do a non-precision approach. It'll be the RNAV GPS Yankee runway 21 approach. That'll be to a missed approach with a hydraulic problem, to a hold. And then it'll be radar vectors back for the ILS runway 21 to an auto land. The hydraulics will be restored at that time, and then we'll shut down and secure from there. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the things in the Ftd-Pc Fs8 briefing. This will be a little bit shorter today. It's not a long briefing at all. We're going to be using the assumed temperature method again, so we'll be putting in an assumed temperature of 42 Celsius and from the full takeoff thrust, and then that'll arm climb 1. And if you remember, climb 1 would be the thrust reduction somewhere between 5 and 15%, with again 25 being the maximum. This will be the route change and runway change that we get. Okay, here's the route for lesson 8. The origin, Boeing Field, we're coming out of Bravo 4. We're expecting runway 32 left. The routing initially is Seattle, J20 Yakima, direct ropes, direct Spokane. And we get the Needle 1 departure, expecting direct Ratty. Will be Sonic 44 Heavy, We'll be in pounds this time, so we'll stay with pounds. We'll stay with a freighter, and we'll use the next generation FMC, the FMCNG, for the next lesson. Planned zero fuel weight will be 460,000 pounds. Fuel on board 140,000 pounds. Gross weight 600,000 pounds. Cost index 100. Cruise altitude 250. And runway 32 left. We're using a thrust of it looks like TO 142 Celsius. We'll try that, see if that arms climb 1. And then you can see there's a thrust there for the runway change. When we do get the runway change, we'll be changing to runway 14 right. A flap 10 takeoff, we're using NADP 1, which is 3,000 foot acceleration height, 1,000 engine out, and the thrust reduction 1,500. Winds are calm, slope is 0, CG 25. And our weather at Boeing Field will be ATIS Information Hotel. Wind calm, visibility 5 statute miles, overcast skies at 3,000 feet, temperature 18, dew point 11, altimeter 29er. And again, the runway 32 left is the departure runway, and they're landing 32 left. Our clearance when we pick it up will be cleared to Spokane, runway 32 left, Needle 1 departure, direct RADI. Flight plan route, climb, maintain 10,000, expect flight level 250 10 minutes after departure. Seattle departure 126.5 and squawk 7474. And here's the lesson events on the map. So runway performance modification, cruise climb, engine 1 oil temperature, VNAV engine out pages, route modification direct, engine in-flight start, arrival preparations into Spokane with the RNAV GPS Yankee 21. We'll descend, have a hydraulic pressure system 1 problem in the descent. Then radar vectors for the RNAV Yankee 21 approach to a missed approach, holding at the missed approach hold, and then we'll restore system 1, get vectors back for the ILS runway 21, and then auto land and shut down and secure. Here's what the map will look like. Again, the magenta line will be the original routing, which will go to Ropes, to RADI, then to Yakima, and to Ropes but we get some modifications along the way, so the modified route will be the what's in yellow. And we'll end up going to Pendleton. This will be part of that reroute when we get runway 14 right, which will go Victor 4 to Pendleton, and then to, looks like Mike Lima Papa, which I think is Mullen Pass, and then direct to Ropes. So that'll be what it looks like on our planned route and our actual route. Planned in magenta, and the actual that we fly is in yellow with the lesson events as we go. So the only difference here is that, yeah, we do get a runway routing change to runway 14 right, but it's not this Laker 1 departure. This is an old departure. The performance change will be, instead of 42 degrees, we're going to get 40 degrees for runway 14 right instead of 32 left. And we'll maintain 4,000 on departure, and the new cruise altitude is going to be 17,000 instead of flight level 250. So this is all part of what we'll get taxiing out, and then we'll have to inform ATC that we need to hold in position because we'll have some reprogramming to do. And again, that does involve the FMC and the MCP to make the change. And whenever you change the thrust like you see here, you're going to get a takeoff speeds deleted, and you'll have to put the new temperature in. And we'll see whether we use, on the flight plan it had us using TO1 with that 40 assumed temperature, so we'll do that. And that should probably still arm climb 1. And then, of course, you'll have to reactivate your V speeds. The runway routing change, again, will be for runway 14 right, so we'll have to change our heading as well. If there's a new altitude, we'll have to change that. We're going to have to reactivate the V speeds. We're going to have to redo our routing and through the FMC. And so we'll make sure all that's complied with before we take off. Again, this is old, but you can see runway 1. It used to be called runway 13 right. Now it's 14 right. Laker departure is a Boeing SID that's made up. It's not a real SID. Off of 14 right, we're probably going to have the Ken 8. We will get a cruise climb. And initially, they gave us 250, but then they changed it to 17,000. But once we get airborne, they'll give us 250 again. So we'll do that cruise climb up to flight level 250. And then we'll have a engine oil temperature problem as we're climbing. So the message would probably be engine 1 oil temp. So we have engine 1, 2, 3, 4 oil temp. It's 7.32. And the condition is the oil temperature is high. Thrust lever number 1, confirm. Retard slowly until the temperature decreases. And again, the pilot monitoring would be the one running the checklist. And he would say that whole sentence first, and then the pilot flying, since he's the one to bring back the thrust lever, he would say thrust lever number 1, confirm, and then the pilot monitoring is going to confirm it. And then he'll say retard slowly until the temperature decreases. So initially it's the pilot monitoring who will say thrust lever number 1, confirm retard slowly until the temperature decreases. Then if I'm the pilot flying, I'm going to say, okay, thrust lever number 1, confirm. And he's going to look at it and say confirm. And then I'm going to say, okay, retard slowly until the temperature decreases. And I'll start bringing it back then. This way, again, I feel the rudder that's required. As I'm bringing the thrust lever back, I can feel the rudder that's required to keep coordinated. And I'll feed my foot in at the same time that I'm bringing the thrust lever back, and then trim off as necessary. Choose one. Engine oil temperature message blanks, or engine oil temperature does not decrease below the red line limit or stays in the amber band for longer than 15 minutes. Go to step 4. So in our case, it's not gonna decrease, and we'll go to step 4. Okay, and in this case, the thrust lever, because the engine oil temperature did not decrease below the red line limit, or it stayed in the amber band for longer than 15 minutes, we're going to shut down the engine. Pilot monitoring would read that. The pilot flying would be the one to do it. It may already be at idle because you brought it back. And so the pilot flying would just reiterate that thrust lever number 1, confirm. And he'd say confirm and then idle. You may not even have to do that if the thrust lever is already back to idle. But it may not be back to idle. It may be partially back to idle. So it just depends whether it's back at idle already or not at idle. And then the pilot monitoring then would continue with that. Fuel control switch number 1, confirm, cutoff. Fuel control switch number 1, confirm. Pilot flying would look at it and say confirm. And then he would bring the fuel control switch to cutoff and say cutoff. Transponder mode selector TA only. Do not accomplish the following checklist. Engine shutdown. And that completes the engine oil temperature checklist. So you can see it's basically that you're bringing back the thrust lever. You're checking to see if you can control the engine oil temperature, whether it stays at the red line limit or in the amber band for more than 15 minutes, or it does resolve itself at a reduced thrust. If it resolves itself at a reduced thrust, you don't need to shut down the engine. You can leave the engine running, but you'd be at a reduced thrust. But if you can't, then you're going to have to shut the engine down. And so we'd go through the engine shutdown procedure, basically. And then that would complete that procedure. And because the engine is out, we can go to our VNAV page. Again, pilot flying would probably be on that page already. And we can select the engine out caroted prompt. And that would give us information for having one engine that's out. The FMC can give us information for one engine out or 2 engines out. So if 2 engines happen to be out, you could go to the engine out page and it would give you information for a 2 engine out situation. But in the case of 1 engine out, then that engine out prompt is giving us information for one engine that's inoperative. And so when you push the engine out prompt, you're going to get the modified econ cruise page. We haven't executed it yet, so it's not going to say engine out until you execute it. But you will see the max altitude for one engine out and what the optimum altitude would be for one engine out. And normally we're going to reference more the optimum than the max because we don't necessarily want to be at the max. But you can see in this case we're well below the maximum engine out altitude, or the optimum for that matter. We're down at flight level 250, and the optimum would be flight level 342. So if we happen to be, let's say, at flight level 390, and we executed this, then it would give us a drift down page, and it would say active drift down cruise, and then we could set up a descent and drift down to a lower altitude based on the fact that the maximum altitude is going to be below where we are. And it'll automatically put in that maximum altitude for us in the cruise altitude line at one left. Now, in this case, we're not going to have that situation because we are well below the maximum engine out altitude. So when we execute this, it'll stay at flight level 250. It's not going to change anything because the max is way above us. You'll also notice there's a prompt for engine out speed as well. This would give us kind of a long-range cruise engine out speed. And if there are two cases where you could use that, or you could use this engine out speed. You kind of have a choice here. The engine out speed, basically, if it keeps you up longer, it keeps you up higher longer. So if like terrain were a factor, you'd want to use the engine out speed, and then that would kind of keep you higher longer in order to drift down to a lower altitude. If terrain's not a factor, or you don't necessarily need to stay up higher longer, then you just use the normal long-range cruise engine out speed that they give us. So in this case, once you execute that, it's going to say active engine out cruise, and then we'll have our long-range cruise speed right here that it will reference for that one engine out. And again, if you didn't want that, you could select engine out speed, and that would recalculate the speed based on the fact that you want to stay up higher longer because terrain may be a factor. So most of the time it's going to be this page that you want, but in the event that you are in a situation where you've got higher terrain and you need to stay up as long as you can with that one engine out, then that engine out speed would be the one to select. And you can see once we execute that, it says active engine out long range cruise is the page. It'll re-reference if you're in VNAV that's going to go to that speed, 0.673. The cruise altitude stays at flight level 250. And again, the optimum for one engine out is flight level 342. And notice again, you get the prompt for all engines now. So if you do get that engine restarted, you can then select the all engine prompt, and that will take you back to a 4-engine configuration as far as the FMC is concerned, giving you performance information. So normally that all engine prompt is there if you get that engine relit, and we will get it relit today. We'll confer with the company, and they'll say, we would like you to attempt one restart on that. Now, chances are if it was an oil temperature problem, they may not want to do that and just leave the engine shut down. But in our case, for training, we're going to go through the process of doing an engine in-flight restart. Route modification is going to be an easy one. After jets, direct ropes. So all we're doing is bypassing Mike Lima Papa. So obviously very easy to do that. Bring ropes to the scratch pad and ropes after jets, and that'll bypass Mike Lima Papa. So all we're doing is bypassing a waypoint here. So you can see they've done that here already. They brought ropes to the scratch pad, ropes on top of Mike Lima Papa. That bypasses that, and then we can execute that. Again, we're going to confer with the company, and then we're going to do an engine in-flight start. For whatever reason, they decide they want to attempt a start, and we agree with it. So let's take a look at the engine in-flight start procedure. So that's going to be under the E's. Engine in-flight start. Notice it's in small caps here, indicating it's a unenunciated checklist. It's not an ICAS message. There's nothing that tells us engine in-flight start, right? So looking in the ICAS message list, like I just fell into, you're not going to see it here because it's not there. It's going to be on the unenunciated checklist. So if we go past this, then we get to the unenunciated checklist portion, and there it is here, engine in-flight start. So engine in-flight start for the freighter, condition an engine start is needed after a shutdown, and there is N1 rotation, no fire, no abnormal airframe vibration. So again, if you had an engine seize or you had a fire, then we're not going to attempt a relight. In this case, we had an oil temperature problem, and maybe they feel it's cooled off sufficiently to try a restart and see if we get that again. And so we're going to go ahead and attempt that restart. So it says monitor EGT during start. Engines may accelerate to idle very slowly, especially at high altitudes. Slow acceleration may be incorrectly interpreted as a hung start or an engine malfunction. So that's kind of something to note, is that if you're at a high altitude and you're trying to restart an engine and the engine does restart, it may accelerate pretty slowly. And you could think that it's hanging up and cut off the start that's progressing actually normally. So it can take, up to 2 minutes, especially at a high altitude, for the engine to light off and accelerate normally. So it's not going to be something that's going to happen in 20 seconds. At flight level 250, it's probably not that long in order for it to accelerate. But if you're up at flight level 390 or 410 or something like that, it's going to take a lot longer for that engine to accelerate. This becomes especially important if you have all 4 engines fail, and you're going to do the multiple engine failure recall items, which are memory, and then you go to cut off and back to run on all 4 engines, and you're again going to wait for the engines to accelerate. And if you're at a high altitude, there could be engines coming back, but they may not look like they're coming back, or they may look like they're coming back slowly and hanging up. So you really have to monitor the engine carefully in order to determine that the engine is accelerating normally, and give it some time to do that. Again, it can take up to that 2 minutes. It's usually the average when you're at a high altitude for an engine to come back, if it's going to come back. If N2 is steadily increasing and EGT stays within limits, the start is progressing normally. So you're watching N2, you're making sure that the EGT is within the limits, and you let it accelerate. Again, it'll be slower. Choose one. Crossbleed is not shown, or crossbleed is shown. The crossbleed would be displayed on the N2. So there'll be a little red tick mark at the N2. It'll say X-BLD. And that would indicate that you're not getting enough windmilling, that you need to do a starter assist. And that's going to involve pulling the start switch out and having the starter assist in the start. If you don't have the crossbleed, if nothing's displayed, then that's telling you that you have enough windmilling to go ahead and bring the fuel control switch to run and not do a starter assist. So when it says X bleed is not shown or X bleed is shown, you're going to look at the N2 to determine that. And if it is shown, it'll be displayed there as that red little tick mark, and it'll say X-BLD. And in that case, you know you have to do a starter assist. If crossbleed is not shown, it's just fuel control switch to run, and then go to step 6. If crossbleed is shown, well, we're going to pull the engine start switch and then go to step 5. If we pull the engine start switch, then it says choose one. Auto start switch is on. You can just bring the fuel control switch to run. If the auto start switch is off, then when the N2 exceeds the fuel on command indicator, fuel control switch to run. So normally if auto start's operative, it's going to be on, and you're just going to go to run. In the case of a starter assist. If for any reason the auto start switch is off, it's not operating, then we just have to wait for the fuel on command indicator before we go to run. And then it says choose one at abort start condition as listed in normal procedures occurs. Any of the things that would be the cause to abort the start, we're going to fuel control switch confirm cutoff, and again the pilot monitoring would read that, and then the pilot monitoring would be the one to put his hand on the fuel control switch and say fuel control switch number 1 confirm, and then you would confirm it as a pilot flying, confirm, and then cut off. Engine start switch push or verify pushed. But if the start is normal, it's just transponder mode selector TARA, and that completes the procedure. So there's a couple different decision trees here. One is if crossbleed is not shown, or crossbleed is shown, and that would be the need to use the starter assist or just a windmilling start. And then the other would be if crossbleed is shown, then you're going to pull the start switch. And then you've got decisions here. Is the auto start switch on or off with that situation? And we would do an aborted start if we needed to. And then that would complete the engine in flight start procedure. And then we're going to do an approach into Spokane. It'll be the RNAV Yankee 2-1 approach. So it's not going to be the ILS. We'll do another non-precision approach. So this is the approach we're going to do. It's going to be the RNAV GPS Yankee runway 21 approach. And we'll probably come in from, I believe, from ropes, and then we'll be vectored to, and we'll probably maybe come out to CBIS so we can do a step down. CBIS will be at 5,000, down to 3,900 to SIGIO, and then down to the decision altitude with LNAV VNAV of 2720. And so this approach will be done in LNAV and VNAV, just like we did last time. So it'll be a kind of a review of non-precision approach procedures and flying a non-precision approach to an MDA or to a DA. Now with the RNAV approaches, they've all been DAs. So with the decision altitude, you just set your minimums at DA. If it was an MDA, like a VOR approach or a NDB approach, then normally we would set the MDA. Well, there's two situations. One is that you're authorized to set the MDA not using plus 50. And that's if you are using a VNAV non-precision approach, and you can, and you're an authorized operator to set the minimums right at the MDA. In most cases, you'd have to set MDA plus 50 feet. So depending on what your MDA is, if your MDA was 1110, then you'd have to set 1160 for minimums. And the reason for that is because when you get to the MDA, you have to make a decision of whether to continue or not continue. And at that point, if you have the necessary runway environment in sight and you decide to continue, well, you have basically 50 feet of play there to disconnect the autopilot, because you have to disconnect the autopilot by 50 feet below the MDA. So by adding 50 feet, you're actually giving yourself to the MDA to disconnect, but you have to disconnect by the MDA minus 50 feet. In other words, you can't use the autopilot down to 200 feet, let's say, and then disconnect, or down to 100 feet and disconnect on a non-precision approach. You pretty much have to disconnect at the MDA, or 50 feet below the MDA is the requirement. But many operators have to set MDA plus 50 for their minimums, unless you're an authorized operator doing a VNAV non-precision approach, and that would be listed in your operations specification. And then you could just set your minimums to the MDA and not add 50 feet. But in the case of a DA, we can go right to, we treat it just like an ILS. You can set in the exact minimums for your decision altitude. But on the way into Spokane, we'll have a hydraulic pressure system problem. And there's actually 3 parts to this checklist if you want to consider it that. The first part is to configure the overhead panel, and that means you're trying to restore the hydraulics. We're going to have, I think, a hydraulic pressure system 1. Yeah, that's what it says here. And, the first part of this is basically to try to see if you can restore hydraulics, and if you can't, then it's a matter of turning off pumps so you prevent any kind of contamination in shutting down the system, basically. Now let's go to the hydraulic pressure ICAS message, so we can go to the H's. And we have hydraulic pressure system 1 will be what we have, and that's 13.13. You do have to kind of be careful here, because I've seen people where they just see the hydraulic pressure message, but they don't look at this last word here, engine or system or demand. So we're going to have hydraulic pressure sys 1. And some people just look at this and say, oh, hydraulic pressure, and they might go to 1312, but they missed the fact that this is for hydraulic pressure engine, not for the system. It could be the demand pump's out, it could be that the engine-driven pump is out, it could be that both are out, in which case you're getting the system, and you have a failure of a system. So you have to read the whole ICAS message to determine what procedure you're going to. Like I said, I've seen people go to this one quite a bit instead of this one. So we have hydraulic pressure system 1 we're going to have a pressure light and system fault light. Condition is the hydraulic system pressure is low. Objective to attempt to restore system pressure, avoid further system damage, and configure for landing using the alternate system. So again, you can kind of think of this as, like I started to say, but I got sidetracked. There's 3 parts to this checklist. The first part is configuring the overhead panel. The second part of this is what's going to be inoperative if you can't restore the hydraulic system. Then what are the inoperative components going to be? This may solve your problem, maybe, just by doing the overhead panel configuration. That could solve your problem. But if it doesn't, then what's going to be inoperative? That's kind of the middle section of the checklist. And then the last section of the checklist is the approach preparations. So you can kind of think of it in those 3 bodies. One would be the overhead panel. The second would be what's inoperative. And then the third would be how are we going to prepare for the approach based on the fact we have a hydraulic system inoperative. And depending on what you have, because there could be possible combinations here, right? It could be hydraulic pressure system 1, 2, 3, 4. We could have hydraulic pressure system 1 and 4. We could have hydraulic system 3 only. We could have hydraulic systems 2 and 3. There could be various combinations here, depending on what's happened. So the first step here is to bring the demand pump selector for the number 1 system on, and then the engine pump switch number 1 off. And what you're doing there is you're trying to see if the demand pump auto system maybe did not work. It didn't come on like it should have automatically. And so by doing this first step, you're kind of seeing if we put that demand pump selector number 1 to on, and you bring the engine-driven pump switch, which is also having a problem, to off, you may be forcing the demand pump 1 to come on if it was an auto failure. And certainly that's worth a shot to see if the auto system didn't come on when it should have. But if that doesn't do anything, and then you can see is do not accomplish following checklist: hydraulic pressure engine. And then it says choose one: hydraulic pressure system message blanks or hydraulic pressure system message stays shown. Well, if it was the auto system that didn't switch, then by going to on with the demand pump, that should solve your problem, in which case the hydraulic pressure system message would blank, and then you could continue normal operation. But if it stays shown, then it didn't work. We tried it, but it didn't work. So now we go hydraulic pressure system message stays shown, go to step 5. We're going to turn the demand pump selector for number 1 off, because we tried the auto system. It didn't work with the auto system. We put it on, it didn't work on, so now we're going to turn it off. And tough luck, we have a hydraulic system that's inoperative. So now it says note degraded or inoperative system items below. And for system 1, that would be the inoperative items would be the center autopilot would be inoperative. Left and right autopilots are available, so you probably already know that. If the system did fail and you were on the center autopilot, it would have disconnected, and you would have taken manual control, and you would have tried a different autopilot, like the left or right. The left outboard elevator is inoperative. Pitch control is reduced. Inboard trailing edge flap hydraulic operation is inoperative. Remember, system 1 is the inboards, system 4 is the outboards. So the trailing edge flaps will move in the secondary mode. Secondary extension from flaps 1 to 5 requires approximately 4 minutes. Remember, we said it was 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So it does take a while for the flaps to go from 1 to 5. Remember, when you go from 1 to 5, you're going from inboards only. The inboard leading edge flaps came out with flaps 1. You had the midspan and inboard come out. But when you go to flaps 5, the outboard leading edge flaps come out, and then the trailing edges start to come out. And 1 to 5, there's a lot of flap that has to come out to go to flap 5. So that takes a while to do that. And so they say allow 4 minutes. It's actually about 3 minutes and 45 seconds. And it says during approach, allow extra time for flap extension. Nose and body gear hydraulic extension and retraction is inop, so alternate gear extension is needed. Nose and body gear steering are inop, so after landing, a tow will be needed after landing, because you're not going to have that nose steering or body gear steering, and you're not going to want to taxi this airplane with differential braking. Wouldn't work very well. So you'll have to advise ATC that after you land, you're going to remain on the runway, and you're going to need a tow off the runway. System 1 alternate brake source is inoperative, but System 4 primary and System 2 alternate brake sources are available, so there's no real problem there, because you still have System 4, which is normal brakes, and then you still have an alternate in the form of System 2, so you just lost one of your backups. That's it. For the not so much for the GE engines, which is what we're using here with a freighter. But if you were using Pratt engines, then thrust reverser engine 1 would be inoperative. Because on the GE engines, the thrust reversers are pneumatic, they're not hydraulic. But on the Pratts, they are hydraulic. And so this would reference the 109 airplane and the Combi airplane. Because for this particular checklist, the passenger airplane is Pratt's, and the Combi would be Pratt engines. And so in this case, we would have thrust reverser engine 1 would be inoperative if we were a passenger airplane, but we're not. We're a freighter, so our thrust reverser number 1 would not be affected at all because it's pneumatic. And then continue on the next page. So you can see here again, the first page here was the overhead panel configuration. This part of it is what's inoperative, what we need to know is inoperative. And then the third part of this is going to be, once you scroll through all these combinations, you have your system components for 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you had 2 systems out, you'd have to run through what's inoperative on system 1, let's say, and what's inoperative on system 4. And typically in full flight training, we do a dual hydraulic failure. In the fixed base, in the FTD here, we do a single failure. But in the full flight, we do a dual failure. And the worst combination is system 1 and 4, because that's got most of the stuff on it. And most of the big components are on system 1 and 4. So we usually fail system 1 and 4, and then you have a dual hydraulic problem leading to a landing in the full flight. And then you notice once you get past that, then it says, and here's the approach preparations basically. It says recall switch push. So we're going to push recall. And you're doing that so that you can see what all your messages are. And because you're going to choose one here, only one hydraulic pressure message system is shown, or more than one hydraulic pressure system is shown. Well, if it's only one, we go to step 12. If it's more than one, we go to step 9. Because on step 9, you can see we're going to plan to land at the nearest suitable airport. We're going to use flaps 25 and ref 30 plus 20 for landing, and our crosswind limit is 20 knots. So with more than one hydraulic pressure system inoperative, you're going to limit your flaps to 25, and you're going to have a speed added of VRF 30 plus 20. And you have that crosswind limit since you're down to only those 2 hydraulic systems. Again, it could be 2 hydraulic systems out, it could be 3 hydraulic systems out. They don't specify, it's just more than one hydraulic pressure system message is shown. You're going to do step 9, 10, and 11. But in our case, it's going to be only one hydraulic pressure message is shown, go to step 12. So we go to step 12, and then the checklist is complete except deferred items. And when you do the deferred items, again, once you set up the approach and we're ready for the descent checklist, then what's highlighted in bold is what's changed. So in this case, you can see auto brake would be whatever auto brake setting you have, or it will be off if system 4 is inoperative. So in our case, system 1 is going to be operative, so it's going to be whatever auto brake we have, because auto brakes are working normally for us. So it'll be auto brake 2, whatever we have normally for landing. And normal is 1 or 2 on a dry runway and a long enough runway. And then if you get into a shorter runway or slippery runway, we're looking at 3 or 4. And in some cases, like we had the other day, we had to use max auto for the that was on the that's on the bonus video that I'm talking about, where you have a situation where we have a cargo fire in the main compartment, and we're expediting to land at the nearest suitable airport, and we're using max auto because the checklist calls for max auto. So normally it's going to be 1 or 2 dry runway, long enough runway. But in this case, system 4 is operative, so we don't have to worry about this. And then landing data is going to be normal too, because we're using VRF, whatever it is for flap 30. If we had more than one system inoperative, then it would be VRF 30 plus 20 with more than one system inoperative, and minimums are whatever they are. So we would say VRF 30 plus 20, and I probably mentioned what that is, 173, with more than one system inoperative, minimums, and whatever the minimums are. And then approach briefing is completed. So for us, Again, it's really a normal checklist. The descent checklist is really normal for us because system 1's out, not system 4, and we have only one hydraulic system out, not 2 or more. So for us, really, the descent checklist, even though we're doing it out of the QRH, for us with system 1, it's really a normal descent checklist. And then we have the approach checklist. And the approach checklist would be altimeters. That's going to be whatever they are. And then you've got this little decision tree here of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different conditions of what you have in terms of hydraulic systems, because there's different combinations. So if you have both systems 1 and 4 inoperative, then we're going to do that system 1 and 4. We'll go to step A. If you have systems 2 and 3, you're going to go to step B. If it's only system 2 is inoperative, go to landing checklist. If it's only system 3 inoperative, go to landing checklist. If it's all other failure conditions, go to C, which is all other system failure conditions. So you can see in our case, if we go through this decision tree, both systems 1 and 4 are inoperative? No. Both systems 2 and 3 are inoperative? No. Only system 2 is inoperative? No. Only system 3 is inoperative? No. We have system 1 inoperative. Okay, all other system failure conditions, that's us. Go to C, all other system failure conditions. So here's A if you had 1 and 4 inoperative. Here's B if you have systems 2 and 3 are inoperative. And then here's C, which is the all other system failure conditions. And that's what we are, since we have system 1 that's inoperative. So it says trailing edge flaps move in the secondary mode. And that's using electric motors. So secondary extension from flaps 1 to 5 requires approximately 4 minutes. During approach, allow extra time for flap extension. Do not accomplish the following checklist. Flaps primary, because you're going to get that. When you go to flaps 1, everything comes out normally because the leading edges are pneumatic. When you go to flaps 5, that's when you're going to get the flaps primary message. You'll get that because the flaps will be extending using the electric motors. And when you get that, you don't have to do the checklist for that because we addressed it here. One thing to note is that when, let's say you were a student and you're doing this, it will take a long time. Most of the time is between 1 and 5. So when you're doing a training session, ideally you want to get the flaps to 5 as soon as you can, because from 5 to 10 and from 10 to 20 and 20 to 30, it's extra time, but it doesn't take that much extra time. Most of the time is between that 1 and 5. To extend fully, it's about 6 minutes, 6, 7 minutes, 6.5 minutes, let's say. So most of that time is 4 minutes, 3 minutes and 45 seconds is between 1 and 5. So once you get beyond 5, it's not that much extra time. Yeah, it's extra time, but not a lot. Whereas 1 to 5 is a lot. And so the sooner you can get the flaps out to 5, and we always tell students this, you don't want to be sitting there dilly-dallying and then you get to in the approach phase and you're still at flaps 1, or you haven't extended the flaps yet, and now you're almost ready to do the approach, and you still got to go from 1 to 5, and that's going to take 4 minutes. So we normally would encourage getting the flaps out to 5 as soon as they can. Now, of course, you have to be below 20,000 feet before you extend any flaps, so you have to be in that range that you're below flight level 200 to operate the flaps. And we know flaps 1 is going to be normal because it's pneumatic, but it's between flaps 1 and 5 that the trailing edge flaps come out, and that's what takes the additional time. And we'll also have to do the alternate gear extension. That's going to take some extra time, but that doesn't take a lot of time. It just takes enough time to read the checklist, push the switch, and then allow the gear to free fall. And yes, it's some additional time, but it's not a lot. So it's not like again, most of the time is that 1 to 5, and then everything else just takes time to read a checklist and do it with a little bit of extra time. So when we're ready for the alternate gear extension, it'll be landing gear lever off. Do not exceed the gear extend limit speed 270.82. There's a warning here that the action is not reversible. So once you bring the gear down, it's down. Alternate nose and body and wing gear extend switches to alternate. So you notice you're bringing these down at the same time. Alternate nose and body and the wing gear extend switches both to alternate. So you're going to push alternate, alternate. And then when all gear are down, landing gear lever down. You may hear the gear disagree once the gear comes down using gravity. If the gear handle is still up, you may get a gear disagree momentarily, but once you bring the landing gear lever down, it agrees now with the gear, and so that message will go away, that gear disagree. And then we have if system 4 is inoperative, and that's not our case, but if it were, we would bring the auto brake selector off because auto brakes are not going to work. And then we have this little warning here. I think one of the lessons here we do system 4. The actual FTD program does system 1 again. I don't see the value in that. I would rather do system 4 on one of these next lessons. I think it's on, might be on the next lesson that we do hydraulic system 4. So that'll be the case with system 4, but for us it's not. And then go to the landing checklist. When we're ready for the landing checklist, it says speed brake. Well, again, for us it's going to be armed, but if system 4 were inoperative, it would remain down. And then landing gear down, and the flaps are going to be 30. If you had more than one hydraulic system inoperative, they'd be 25. And that would complete the hydraulic pressure system checklist. So you can see it's a pretty long checklist. You know, it's how many pages is it? You know, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 pages. 9 pages long, so it's a pretty long checklist. But it's pretty logical to go through. And we'll go through it step by step as we do it. And again, I like to think of it like this because it's easy to break this down once you think of it that you're configuring the overhead panel, what's inoperative, and now you're doing your approach preparations. 3 distinct phases of this checklist that's 9 pages. And again, here's the hydraulic panel. So you're going to have a pressure light here, and you're going to have a pressure light here, and you're going to have a system fault light. So all these things are going to be illuminated. And then, of course, the first step in the checklist was to turn the engine pump switch off and then turn the demand pump to on. And that you're seeing if the auto system perhaps failed to switch and put this pump on. And if it did, you'll restore pressure. If it didn't, well, okay, then turn it off. And now this system is inoperative. Then we're going to set up for the, let's see, approaching the top of descent point. Looks like we're going here from Putnam, I think that's Putnam, to jets to ropes. And then from somewhere in here, we'll get vectors for the RNAV approach. Again, these are old points here. This may be the ILS-2 one, which we're not doing. Looks like we'll get radar vectors after ropes for the approach. And again, ours is going to be the RNAV Yankee 2-1, so this will be CBIS, and this will be SIGIO. And then to runway 2-1 for the RNAV Yankee 3-2, right? So these points will be different. And then, of course, at some point, we're going to extend the final approach fix into CBIS. And we'll be CBIS at 5,000, SIGIO at 3,900, and then to the runway. The missed approach procedure, this is the diagram of the missed approach. This is from the QRH. You know, in the QRH, in the section, in the maneuver section, you'll have some diagrams like this. And this would be for a 4-engine or a 3-engine missed approach. And the only point here that we have to make is that we have hydraulic considerations to make for the missed approach. So in the event of a missed approach, we're going to go to flaps 20. The flaps will retract from 30 to 20, a little bit slower, but actually they're fairly normal, going from 30 to 20. But we're going to leave the gear down, obviously, because we use the alternate system. We're not going to raise the gear. We're going to climb out with the gear down if we have to do a missed approach with the hydraulic system inoperative, like we have. We also have to take into account that the nose and body gear steering is going to be inoperative. So again, we'd have to advise ATC of that and make sure they understand that we're going to remain on the runway. We're not going to be able to taxi off the runway. And so we have to handle our missed approach a little bit differently in the sense that we can't raise the gear, that's all. And that means that, and we'd probably want to accelerate to flap 5 speed and stay at flap 5 speed for the hold. And again, that'll put us at 200 knots anyway. And that's the max holding speed below 6,000. So again, why retract flaps from 5 to 1 using the alternate system, which is going to take a long time. And chances are we want to, if we can, come back and land. So we would normally limit the flaps to 5 unless we need to retract them and go somewhere else. For an auto land, all 4 hydraulic systems are required, so we're going to have to restore the hydraulics after we do the missed approach. And once we do that, the ILS will be available, and we'll get radar vectors for the ILS runway 21 approach. Hydraulics restored for the second approach so we can do an auto land, because it does require all 4. Once we land, again, we'll do the shutdown and secure.